What's up, beautiful people? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Victoria and welcome back to the Dresden Files spoiler challenge reading vlog series. If you've been following along, we've already read Stormfront and Full Moon, so we are now moving on to the third book in the Dresden Files series, and that is Grave Peril. If this is your first time checking out this series, what we are doing here is I am doing a reread challenge for myself where I am trying to read all of the Dresden Files series before getting to DragonCon, which starts August 29th. As a reminder, there are about, what did we count, 17 books in the series or so? With that in mind, I am jumping right into the third book. I literally just finished filming the spoiler review of this lovely book, and we're moving right along to Grave Peril. So if you haven't watched one of these vlogs yet, the way we're going to do this is, since I have read this book before, I'm going to read the back of the book, try to tell you if I remember anything from this book, and then I'm going to read it, might check in with you at the end, give you my thoughts. So that is what this vlog is going to be. I am going to get started on this book today because I'm anticipating needing to read like 2 of these a week in order to complete this series before getting to DragonCon. So with that, let's go ahead and read the synopsis of Jim Butcher's Grave Peril, Book 3 in the Dresden Files series. Harry Dresden's faced some pretty terrifying foes during his career. Giant scorpions, oversexed vampires, psychotic werewolves. It comes with the territory when you're the only professional wizard in the Chicago area phone book. But in all Harry's years of supernatural sleuthing, he's never faced anything like this. The spirit world has gone postal. All over Chicago, ghosts are causing trouble, and not just of the door-slamming, boo-shouting variety. These ghosts are tormented, violent, and deadly. Someone or something is purposely stirring them up to wreak unearthly havoc. But why? And why do so many of the victims have ties to Harry? If Harry doesn't figure it out soon, he could wind up a ghost himself. So that is Grave Peril. I honestly could not tell you anything about this book. I have not done a reread of this book ever. Fresh, baby. But last vlog I said, oh, Butters enters this book. He didn't. I think Butters enters this book. We got dead bodies. We got ghosties. Butters is a mortician. It has to be this book. He enters the series pretty early on. So I'm going to say it's this book. It's this book. It has to be this book. So I think Butters comes in on this book. I don't know. Yeah, I think Butters comes in on this book. Is all I've got for this. If it wasn't this one, I'm pretty sure it's this one. I don't think it's Summer Night. But those are all my predictions. So I'm excited to reread this book because I don't remember anything from it. I don't remember anything that happens in this book whatsoever. Read the back of this, I was like, that didn't ring any bells. So we'll see. Let's get to reading. This'll do. Hello. Hold on. Guess what? Okay, guess what now? We finished Grave Peril. That is number 3 in the Dresden Files. We did it. I was able to snag the audiobook for this for like $3 because I already had the digital copy of this. I'm like out of breath for trying to get this little area situated. It's difficult when you're packing to find good places to film, especially when you've been out all day. But yeah, so we finished this book. And first off, I have to say, what a jump We made some really big leaps here in how the story is told and also kind of what our formula is here. As I mentioned in my spoiler-filled vlog for Full Moon, we were getting some nuggets of Butcher setting up what the Dresden Files would become, but I really did not remember clearly, as in my intro to this where I made my guesses, I clearly didn't remember how big of a leap we went from book 2 to book 3 when it came to like establishing what the Dresden Files is really going to be about, because I feel like this book in particular is like book 1 for the rest of the series in a way. Like, we are putting a ton of chess pieces on the board that I didn't even think came in so early to the story in this book. And I will say, as someone whose probably best memories of the series are from later on, because obviously those are books that I read more recently, I am shocked with how much is in this third book. Like, how much is introduced already. I was floored. First off, I had no clue that Michael came in the third book. I don't know why I thought he came in later in the story, but as we open up the story, so what's really fun is we open the third book up. As I mentioned, narrative structure is a little bit different. We actually open up in the middle of something that's going on and not necessarily being introduced to this mystery right away and like kind of going in chronological order. We are jumping ahead in the middle of it. And within the first page, on the first page, the first thing I highlighted was Michael saying, "Can we go any faster?" It wasn't a complaint, it was just a question, calmly voiced. And I had to put the book down and have like a little bit of a shake. A little astonished, because I did not realize that Michael came in so early on in the series. I mean, he's been like present in my mind. Obviously, I know who he is as someone who's read the majority of the series, but I did not realize that he had come in so early. He had been introduced so early. So that was the first thing. Like, I'm still like flabbergasted by that. The other thing that I think is really fun is, so when I originally read the Dresden Files, I did not play D&D, but I play D&D now, and as soon as Michael got like reestablished in my brain, immediately I was like, Michael is a paladin. The stereotypical paladin. Especially near the end. I was like, oh my god, he is that paladin in your D&D group that you're like, the rest of you are like chaotic good, maybe chaotic neutral, and there's your paladin, and you're like, how are you here? What are we doing lawful good? Like, we've got to get it together. We've got to bend the rules a little bit to make this shit happen. So that is the first thing. And I will say, like, Michael has always been one of my favorite characters. I think because I grew up Catholic, like, just a lot of the references that are made in the book. I had a very lovely church that I went to growing up as a kid, and so I have very fond memories of like the priest that we had at our church and things like that. And so I've always, especially when I would have read this book, I would have still been in high school, so I would have been going to the church that I grew up in, and so I feel like I felt a bit of a connection to the character of Michael because it was something that I could relate to from my own life. So I think I've always had a bit of a soft spot for him, even though a paladin is definitely not a character I would ever play in D&D. But so I was super excited to see Michael come back into the picture so soon. It was interesting to see how Butcher set up some of the events at the end of the book, specifically with Susan, with Michael and his conversations early on about Dresden having issues with expressing his feelings to Susan, and just not wholly embracing their relationship in a way that Michael feels he should take these next steps. I mean, obviously coming from a man whose wife continuously has children, which of course is like a Catholic stereotype. I felt like the ghost aspect of it all, I kind of almost wish we got more ghost in this book. I think maybe I just like ghost because I am a little curious about some of the other ghosts that they had encountered previously to that like now point that were dropped into the story at the beginning of this book, where we're learning about Agatha and kind of Harry seeing these like barbed wires and just some of the ghosts that they had been protecting people from and releasing from these situations. I almost wish we got a little bit more of that. Like, it's hinted on multiple times throughout the story, but there is so much going on that I understand why Butcher couldn't just go ham with like the different types of ghosts. And I think that's also why we got kind of dropped into the action in the very beginning and then kind of got caught up where everything came from here. And where kind of how long Michael and Dresden have been working together again. You know, Michael mentions Elaine, and I can't remember if later on in the book we get a little bit more background of when Harry and Michael met, because I don't think it's technically just for them working on these ghosty ghost things that are going on in Grave Peril, because he knows about Elaine and some of the things that had happened in Harry's past. So I feel like if they've known each other for longer than that, but I just don't remember if that's ever talked about later on in the series. So I'm curious to see if that comes up again, because it's just not ringing a bell for me. Again, like the other things that I could not believe that Leah was introduced already, which I don't know why I couldn't believe that, because the next book is Summer Night, which I know has a lot more to do with the Never Never and the fairies and all of that stuff. So I don't know why that surprised me that that was so early on. So I was super surprised by that. Once we went backwards, right? So essentially how this book is structured, as I mentioned, is we get kind of thrown into the now, into the present of Dresden and Michael going to this hospital from a tip from Bob about this angry ghost that is going to do some harm to some newborns possibly. And so they're going to do that. They end up having to follow the ghost into the Never Never, which is how we get introduced to Leah. Like we get there and then we jump back to the morning with Harry like starting off back in his office. So we kind of reset a little bit. We get introduced to somebody who's coming to Harry for help, and that is a girl named Lydia. And we get introduced to the idea of like Cassandra's tears, which has to do with somebody who is, you know, might have like prophetic dreams or visions or things like that. And basically she's asking for help. With that, we get introduced to the idea of going to see Father Morris, and Harry, of course, being Harry, giving up his shield bracelet to protect himself from the ghosties to give to her to help her out, because he just can't help himself, as he says repeatedly throughout the story. And there was one line with the character of Lydia. Lydia uses her feminine wiles, and there was a line that I kind of found to be a little bit unsympathetic to why a young girl would be in the place to where she feels like she needs to provide something when she's asking for help, essentially from an adult. When a young girl is asking this, you know, somebody who's in her teens, of saying that this wasn't a girl who was used to playing things fair and square. And I don't think that was a fair assessment or characterization of the situation that Lydia was in, because even later, like, Dresden notes that Dresden and Father Morris both note that she probably was somebody who's experienced abuse, has substance abuse problems. And so I think there was like a lot of darker things there, and I don't know why that line just really stuck with me. And I was like, as an adult, like, you know, at least 10 years older than this girl, she's coming to you for help. And I feel like if you notice that her first instinct was to offer up her body to receive help when she's in trouble, that it's not her not playing fair and square. It's like, unfortunately, this girl has been in situations where that is the only kind of resource that she has to get help, and assumes that that's what she has to do to receive help. So that was something that kind of, I was a little disappointed in that line. Obviously, Harry's character acts differently than that line. I just felt like that line just was really ill-placed for the rest of Harry's response to the situation. So I'm not quite sure why that's there, but it was just something I thought about. And then I also put in my notes here that I think it's also something consistently we do see with Dresden, is like, he was wronged by Elaine, and I do think that that colors Dresden's perception of women, and women that he has not opened up to in a certain way, and even why he struggles with Susan, to understand that just because one person, you know, betrayed your trust doesn't mean that everybody's going to. And so, you know, I think that is something that we're learning. He's learning throughout the book and coming to terms with, but it was just also something that I noted very early on in the book. I really liked the wire imagery with the ghost, and I thought like the whole possession kind of thematic that we had was very interesting, especially like introducing Michael. I was thinking about this today of, you know, why we often see Catholicism portrayed in horrors, especially when it comes to things like possessions and stuff like that. And a lot of it is, I think, is like Catholicism is so old compared to some of the other denominations in Christianity that it has a lot more similarities with older religions and with pagan religions. I mean, obviously, because there was a lot the Catholic Church assimilated from local cultures to try to do conversions. So there are things in that, and then also just the way the church is structured, it's a lot more formulaic. There's a lot more rituals involved. It just has a bit more of a mystical vibe in a way, I think. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but I do think, like, you know, even with like something like magic in this book, rituals are involved, things like that. And I think there's a lot of that in Catholicism just because of how old it is and how much it's pulled from the cultures that have been influenced by the mass expansion of Catholicism during the massive colonial era. And not only with going to the Americas and other parts of the world, but even thinking about like it expanding through the Roman Empire, going into the Ottoman Empire, and just like different things like that. And just similar to like Greek Orthodox as well, that has a lot of that ritualistic nature. I think it lends itself better to these kind of stories. So I was thinking about that with the possessions, with the barbed wires, with the torturing of souls. It was all very, I felt it played very well into each other and also really fit into that horror vibe. I felt like this one we were really leaning more on the horror genre in Grave Peril than we had in the other two books. Even though, you know, we had werewolves and things like that, but still. It was I think, you know, Murphy kind of took a back seat in this book because we did have Michael here. And I mean, Murphy kind of takes a back seat in a lot of the books. In the beginning, I feel like she's there, but I feel like we don't get as much of her. I feel like we don't get as much of her in this book because she's kind of down for the count. I think, unfortunately, what happened to Murphy sounds really traumatic, but we didn't get much insight into that. Instead, I think we lived through Dresden when it came to the nightmare eating his magic, which again was such a cool plot device. Such a great way to already put a roadblock, in his way to tamper his power and to make what's going on with this nightmare even more personal. Another great way that Butcher tested both Harry and Michael and kind of put them in the same path in a way of having Michael lose his sword and Harry lose part of his magic to the nightmare was such a great way to put more roadblocks and make them in more peril, because Harry with his full magic and Michael with his sword, they're a pretty good duo. So it was a great way of stripping them down and also testing both Harry's faith in himself and his magic and his abilities, but also testing Michael as well, which was great because he, you know, when we first meet him, he is such a paladin. He's such a bastion of his faith. And to see him questioning if, you know, his same trajectory is what his path is now was very fun. And I definitely did not remember that we were going to get the vampire ball at the end of this book either. I know we were introduced to Kyle and his sister, and, you know, this book really was at breakneck speed when it came to all of the things that were going on and how much shit Harry was in, the majority of it. But the way that Butcher has this original story, I don't know if I ever really saw, and this may have just been me like not paying as much attention to the mystery element of the story, but I don't know how we really got to the point of it definitely has to do with the vampires with the nightmares. I guess it was just the idea of like, they have a vendetta against me. Who in this town has a vendetta against me? And I think for me, what happened with Bianca, like, there was a bit of a leap that we had to make in a way that Bianca would really be, like, that bent out of shape about their interaction in Stormfront. I think that's mostly because, like, it wasn't brought up in Full Moon. And so I did feel like that shift for me was a little tough. And I was like, okay, so we had to make Rachel seem a bit more important to Bianca than we would have picked up in Stormfront, kind of thing. So I did feel like that was a bit of a stretch. We got there, but I guess we're saying, she did say that, like, being brought down a peg is what pushed her to want to move further. And then I think maybe the idea of getting power and getting revenge. I mean, we do have the idea of Thomas also being in the crosshairs of Bianca for taking, with him being with Justine and just setting her up to be a pretty petty bitch, as she is. So I do think Butcher laid out those pieces to try to make that work, and I'm willing to take it because the entire vampire ball is highly entertaining. Our first introduction to the different vampire courts, you know, we have the white court, we have the red court, and the black court. We meet all three of them at this event. I love that we met the dragon. I do believe he comes back into play at some point later on in the series. But it was such a fun scene. There is the gift that Harry receives in Grave Peril that comes back into the series later on, which snaps. I love that. I love a great callback, and I don't even think I probably picked up on the callback when it happens later on in the series, but I loved it. I think that the thing that was most shocking to me was really the path that Susan took. Location change. Okay, anywho, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, Susan. So I find it fascinating that 16-ish years later, reading this book, I have such a different reaction to the conclusion, in a way, of Susan and Dresden's love story. I wish I had a video of me talking about it 16 years ago so I could better understand why I had such a strong dislike for the character of Susan. I do think that I found her tendency to put herself in harm's way for a story to be annoying. And I still think it's a little annoying. But at the same time, looking at both Harry and Murphy as characters, they also put themselves in harm's way for what they believe. And I think having a better understanding of Susan's values in being that she believes it's important for her to get these stories out there, not just for her own self-worth and for her career, but because she believes that people need to know what's going on. That is something so ingrained in her that she continues to put herself in places she shouldn't be, such as Bianca's ball. And we do see the repercussions for that. And I think with that as well is that we're again seeing Harry's tendency to put off things that he finds uncomfortable and not giving people whole truths because he thinks he's protecting them in some way, and protecting himself in some way actually puts them in a worse position. And so I think we see that with Susan as well, of if Harry had taken the time to talk to her and have a discussion, although he did have a lot of things going on, but if he had prioritized honesty in the relationship a little bit more when it came to Susan, especially knowing the kind of person she is and knowing that she's going to do what she needs to do to get the story that she wants to get, perhaps there could have been a different outcome. But at the same time, I think they're both culpable for this in the relationship, and I think it took Harry realizing that Susan was willing to put herself in harm's way to protect him, such as giving up a year of her memories to save him from the pain and suffering he was having from reneging on his deal with Leah once more. And then also just understanding how capable she really is, even if she's not, necessarily as capable in the way that Murphy is, to taking care of herself. That I feel like it was almost like he finally realized that what he was scared of wasn't really anything to be scared of. That giving himself over to Susan and expressing his feelings for her wasn't as scary as losing her and as what happened to her. So it was complicated. It was a complicated relationship. Really just enjoyed that overall arc in this book, and I like how it concluded. Am I still a Dresden and Murphy stan? Yes, I am still, but I really like what Butcher did with Susan and Harry. I think their relationship was fun, complicated. I think it was one of those relationships where somebody looks back on it and wish that they had really taken the time to enjoy it. And I think that's a lot of what Harry's experiencing, and kind of what Michael touches on in the beginning of the book, of Harry not taking that second to prioritize those things for himself. And even Bob mentions it again of Harry not really having a strong home. Therefore, things like the nightmare can get in, unlike in Michael's home, because he doesn't allow himself to create a family, to create stability that's needed in feeling safe in a home. Which, I mean, I think it works for Harry because obviously Harry's doing that for a reason. I think plenty of people can have a safe home as a single person with a cat, with plants and things that they love and filling their home up. And I do think there are people who could have that space. I think in Harry's case, it makes sense. And it makes sense in what other underlying things Butcher is talking about in this book. But I do want to say, if you live alone, that doesn't mean you don't have a home. You don't have a safe space. Like, that, you know, like, family is important, but family is what you make it. If your family at the moment is your cat and your plants, that's great. That's all I wanted to add to that. But I think in Dresden's specific case, it makes sense because he's putting barriers between himself and others, I think, from a lot of the trauma that he experienced when he was younger with Justin and Elaine. So it makes sense in his particular situation. You know, that's how I'm gonna wrap it up. Full Moon was a slog. This was so much fun. This definitely reminded me a lot more of the Dresden Files that I remember in my brain than what I read in Full Moon Stormfront. However, the saga continues of where is Butters? Because I swear, characters I did not even think came in this early are here. And Butters is nowhere to be seen. I'm embarrassed. So I'm going to end here with that. I think I mentioned in the beginning of this that maybe I didn't. Did I mention? I gave this 4 stars. And I feel like that's a solid for this book. I had a great time. I already have Summer Night in the queue. I was able to grab the audiobook from Libby as well, so I can definitely keep working through it. We are getting through these. We're gonna finish this by August 29th. Mark your calendars. Do it, mark them down. Anywho, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up. I have been rambling. I also want to quickly get started with Summer Nights. So, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. I would love to hear your thoughts on Grave Peril, so drop those down in the comments. And if you are interested in sticking around for some more bookish and nerdish content, feel free to subscribe. I upload every Sunday and sometimes on Wednesdays. And until next time, I hope you read a good book. I hope you find some joy. And most importantly, I hope that you do something to make the world a better place. And I'll see you in my next one. Bye!